Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for working on this project. The video for this is to just talk through my analysis and specifically spend a little bit time in the clustering. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So it looks like all four of us did this first part pretty easily, the pre-analysis journal. This is part of reflexivity in analysis, where we're always just being aware of how ourselves are doing the work of interpreting and recognizing that we cannot really be free of bias and that it's influencing our processing and our interpretation. And that's why it's so important for us to come together as a group to sort of debrief these later. But these are spaces to just sort of acknowledge that. And here and all throughout the process, I'm thinking about my own self-awareness, also political awareness, as I noticed when I was listening to several of the interviews, that there is, certainly a stance of ethics, but also a little bit of politics there too. I was also trying to notice my internal dialogue. So the way I was sort of talking back to things, places I was laughing or crying, or the kind of interpretation I was making. And then I really tried to sometimes detach and say, like, what's really happening here? Is it what I want it to be, or is it really what's happening? So that kind of scrutiny. And then always trying to go back to the language of the person and how they say those, how they frame it, or what words they use. So I think we all did a good job with this sort of, well, there's no way to do this wrong, the pre-analysis part. So then there's the first encounter. And so again, I listened to the entire thing, and I really wanted to think about, again, back to our question is like, what is happening here? What is the experience of Allison with poetry during COVID? How is it working for her? What does it mean for her? What is happening? I kept having to keep saying, like, what is she saying about poetry, about her life, about these connections for her? Who are the people and the activities that are shaping these experiences, and what does it mean for her? I just kept kind of returning back to that. So it was easier for me to do this part, I think. And again, I think all of us did this well too. You have a big picture about what this means for them, right? So I have some notes in there. Okay, this is the part that was time consuming, and I think challenging, because I kept saying, am I doing this right? And I was wondering, you probably all think the same thing too. So once we have the transcript in here, which I pasted for everybody, feel free to delete spaces or lines or number things if they're easier for you. But I certainly didn't want you to feel like there's a proper way or spend a ton of time formatting. So do what is comfortable for you. So I spent my first time through the transcript doing the exploratory notes. So I was just trying to capture all my thoughts, all my feelings, my questions as I was making sense. And I had to do this in a couple stints because it was time consuming and I found myself rushing. So I thought I should just stop and come back to it later. And I know my transcript was about 45 minutes. I think Barb's was an hour and 20. So that is a lot longer. Others were, 40 minutes, 35 minutes. So it just kind of depends on the pace. So be kind to yourself. But here I kept thinking, this is about COVID and about school and teaching, but our question is really the role of poetry. So I really wanted to like zoom in anytime like writing or poetry or poetic thinking was sort of happening. And that's actually Allison's word, poetic thinking, that resonated with me. So what are her experiences with poetry? Who are the people? What are the activities? How are those experiencing manifesting? Again, like, what's the experience with the people? What's the experience? What's the activity? What is she actually doing with the poetry? why are those happening or working in that way? And for much of this, the reason has to do with the implications of COVID. And then where are these things happening? And again, this is what's fascinating about it, is because so much of where things are happening are in the homes or, you know, in digital spaces, but also the cultural context of where Allison is in a rural space. And that's important too. So that's why we want to look at these cases. Okay, so you can read through this when I share it with you. You know, sometimes I put in italics, sometimes I put in parentheses, sometimes I put in quotes. I wasn't really consistent with this, but I kind of wanted to differentiate like her words versus my words and my questions. And it doesn't have to make a lot of sense to everybody who's looking at it necessarily, because this is just sort of the first step of getting it all out there and sort of my interpreting of what's going on. So again, I kept thinking, what's the activity? Who are the people? What's sort of happening, you know, here, my first, my kind of questions and things. Then the second part, I came back again, and I actually didn't look at the transcript too much. I actually was just looking at the exploratory notes and trying to reduce it further. So I guess that's the whole point of this part, is that we have this really long transcript, and we're trying not to conflate or like make assumptions or narrow the richness of it. But in order to have it make sense to a lot of different people and make it accessible, we really do have to, you know, we're probably going to write like a 20-page article. And, you know, even just one of these transcripts is 40 pages. So it's like, when you think about that, that's kind of crazy. So we're really trying to just have a system for reducing and trying to find the essence of what's going on. So I already sort of reduced it once on the right. And now I'm going to I tried to reduce it further by going to the experiential statements. And this is where I'm trying to like make a statement of like, what is happening here. So I'm trying to avoid just putting a word, but trying to say like, make kind of an interpretive statement. And we talk to our students about thematic statements all the time, like kind of has to have like a subject and a verb or some sort of like action is happening. But anyway, so what is sort of Allison's commentary about this? How can I make sense of what's important about it? So I try to actually just use a lot of gerunds at the beginning and kind of show that it's an action or an activity that's happening. Something more general, a little summary. And I feel like I got better at doing this as I went through, because at the beginning, I'm like, what am I doing? So as I went through, I started noticing, you know, again, I was familiar with the transcript, but I started noticing different things. So here I have some statements, you know, that kind of point out the people, like this is family, and the spaces, school and home spaces. And so again, what are the people, what are the activities that are happening related to poetry, and how is Allison making sense of that? You know, teaching, the teaching structure came up because of being online, and then that's where poetry came in. Then some feelings about doing well in new structures. And I wrote this because later on, there's a part where she feels like she was doing her best teaching almost because of COVID. And that had a lot to do with the poetry she was writing and the poetry she was sharing with her students. And so these, I'm trying to make sense of the spaces and the feelings and all these kinds of different things. Okay. So I know Jennifer already took a stab at this, and her transcripts looks really great too. And it's a slightly different, and that's fine. So you all can look at Jennifer's or mine if you haven't started this part yet. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. All right, and so after I did the experiential statements, I did another sort of reflexive journal just to kind of track some of the things I was anxious or confused about, and how I was making meaning of everything that was sort of happening. This is much shorter, here. I could have spent a little bit more time thinking about this, but it really was just a place to sort of document some of my steps of doing it. Okay, so this is the part that's kind of difficult to do, but I want to just tell you, like, I enjoyed this the most. I really enjoyed listening to them, but this was kind of fun for me to do. So I'm going to show you sort of how I set this up. I have some steps in here, but I'm going to show you a little bit about how I set it up. So you might be more comfortable like printing out the experiential statements first, and then moving them around like with paper to try to find clusters. But this is the part where we're working with the experiential statements that we wrote, and we're going to try to find like patterns or grouping them to see sort of what we notice. So what I did was I made insert table. I made, I don't know, like a table like this. And then I selected this side and I just merged them. And that's just kind of how I started. So I figure I'm going to put all of the statements over here and then just kind of drag them over. So you can just copy this column. Okay, so I pasted them in here. There's like 62 or something like that. And then over on the right, I started sort of dragging them over and just making sort of a little topic. These aren't necessarily themes as much as they're just sort of topics, trying to cluster these experiential statements into different topics. And then I just kept adding more of them, changing the topics. So I thought, okay, this is about community. So any of these statements that referenced community, I like just drag them over here. Anything that was related to memories, I dragged it over here. But then once I started going, I changed the topics because I thought, oh, that's not really what this is. I could narrow it better. So I renamed the topics. So this was just like finding patterns and then trying to give them a topic. And then some could function in different spaces more than once. So I just, pasted those into twice or different things. Yeah, so I really was just like highlighting it and dragging it over. Okay. So you can see now it looks even more different. Like I just changed the category just to writing, and anything kind of related to the act of writing, I put in here. And then I started noticing, oh, there's something specifically about the shift of COVID or the implications of COVID. And then I started separating school versus community. And then anytime she talked about numbers. So again, I'm just dragging these things over here, trying to sort and move things around. Of course, you can see now I let go of all the numbers because that wasn't as important anymore. I'm just really trying to drag them over to where I think that they would fit. And then the experiential themes column starts to get less and less as I bring things over to the right. And now I've even defined this slightly different again. I have writing acts and purposes, and now I have a ton of things over here where I feel like I have to find, different categories for this. I have to think about what's happening for Allison and with her experience of writing. And then she said this word, poetic thinking, and then I started thinking, oh, I could just use this as a category and start anywhere she's talking about doing poetic thinking. And I'm interpreting her thinking for Allison. She talked about poetic thinking as zooming in or permission to look closely. And it seemed like it was also permission not to be big picture, not to ignore, the small things around her. And I'm also now thinking for Allison, her experience of poetry was being gentle with herself, was a way of coping, was a way of connecting to her family who was living with her, to her students, but also for comfort in some ways, and play. She talked about play, and she almost was saying it's healthy thinking. And so the experiential statements, I started moving into poetic thinking. And some of that could be, so down here, she used the word souls, like poetry was a way of taking care of the students' souls. And that came up a couple times in different ways, but I'm using her language. She said the word souls. So I'm just putting that here. And souls as her soul, the student soul, how she was talking about it. So I have a different category here, being gentle with herself. I think this could go with poetic thinking. I'm not sure, but right now I have them separate, and I wanted to kind of get a sense of what you all were thinking when we met. So I have quite a few different, these are still topics. I haven't turned them into necessarily theme statements yet. I'm not sure what they're doing. So here I'm just clustering. Does that make sense? I'm just doing the clustering. So this might be easier just to print it out and do clustering, cut it up. I don't know. Okay, and so now that I have some of the clustering, I'm going back to this table, and I have the topics that I think work for the most part, but I could play with those all day. I don't think they'd ever be quite right. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. But again, I keep coming back to the question of what are the experiences of poetry for Allison during COVID? And I keep coming back to her voice and her story and her case and her context, not mine. And so I have to keep, putting my own on the side as much as I'm enjoying and find commonalities with her. So anyway, so I put the topics that I've sort of come up with now. I put the experiential statements here. I don't have the quotes yet. That's going to be really important later. But I think it's easy to go back up to the transcript and search for the quote that I need. I didn't number them because I couldn't find a good way of doing it without it being very messy. But since we're working on a Google Doc, we can find phrases. So I can search for prior experiences with poetry, and then right next to it is going to be the quote. So quotes that I need. Anyway, so I'm going to hold off on doing that a little bit. But now I have a topic, an experiential statement, and I'm going to look at the experiential statements here and see if I can come up with sort of a personal experiential theme based on these collections. And so here I think like having to reword this in a way where I have kind of a conclusion about stuff. So right now I think I have some conclusions about poetic thinking. So I'm going to type that in there. So I'm playing around with this thematic statement. So I'm trying to replace this sort of topic. So I'm going to try to, because that's really we're not trying to just go for that category. We're trying to say what's really happening here. So I think that this means for Allison that she's identifying poetic thinking as a healthier way of being, and she's trying to do it. Like she's trying to do it. And so what are some examples of poetic thinking? And so I think these are experiential statements that I think prove that it is a healthier way of being. Now, I want to talk to you all about this too and get your sense of it, because this healthier feels to me I don't know if it's too interpretive or not. And maybe it might be a better thing of saying she's identifying poetic thinking as a way, as a need during COVID, or as a mark of healing, of coping, or healing. I don't know. I feel like I would want to, that's what the benefit of being together, you know. So I have sort of this temporary one that I want to talk to you all about here, right? So that's sort of what we're getting at. And then pulling some quotes once I have that, some different quotes, and then also seeing maybe some of these might go somewhere else, right? So it's really just a clustering. And this is really the work of trying to get at the essence of Allison's experience. Okay, and so I was working a little bit on this first one, looking at these experiential statements and trying to think about what are these different writing acts and purposes doing for Allison. And I feel like when she was talking about blogging versus poetry versus her journalism and blogging about COVID as sort of chronicling, which she did for like 270 days or something, and poetry the poetry was not really about COVID, it was about these smaller moments. And I think this is saying that contrasting writing structures is an invitation to experience, maybe not experience, is an invitation to engage or distance from her context, you know, or from the COVID context or something. I'm not sure, something like that. You know, she talks about, you know, she was able to zoom into being a runner and zoom into the dog tooth was one of her poems. And so it's, you know, it is a way of chronicling her experiences, but not just about COVID, but about what COVID affords her or what COVID afforded her. And this might get into the other one about like COVID implications, COVID shifts. You know, this might be a different category. I don't know. But I think we're trying, I think what's manageable is to try to find like the, I don't know, 3 to 5, I mean, really narrowing these down to 3 to 5. That makes it more manageable for other people to say, like, what is Allison's case really about? And I have to keep coming back to that. All these different ways that she wrote. So I'm sure that this is really important. Poetic thinking, that is really important. Poetic thinking might be part of what she did with her students. All of this is about COVID, so I'm just not really sure. I mean, this might be part of poetic thinking. It seems important that this impacted her teaching. So the poetic, the impact on teaching might have to be one. So that seems like that's an important one. 1, 2, 3. And maybe this can go with community, and maybe souls should go with poetic thinking so that we can kind of narrow it. I don't know where numbers fits in. I was just struck by how well she knew all of the numbers. This might go with community or communities, maybe. Okay, so I think this book might go with teaching. Okay, So I think what I'm doing now is getting back to think I can find maybe narrowing this down to like 3 to 5 key themes. So once I'm going to kind of think about this, I want to think about it with you a little bit more before I make it concrete. But after I make it concrete, I'll probably plug everything into here so it looks a little bit neater because it's kind of wild right now. And again, like this is tricky because, you know, what really we are doing is distilling it down further. We're, you know, we're reducing the raw data from the transcript. We keep reducing and reducing, but we're trying to get at the essence, which is why so I want to maybe make a mark. Is this the essence of Allison's experience? So I want to make sure that when I create this, when I get down to that, this is the most important. Can I say that these 3 to 5 are the essence of her experience? Can I pull some quotes that really get at that? So this is the part I think I'm ready to hear what you all think and see if you can help me think about this a little bit more, narrowing it or the clusters down. But I think I've done the work to kind of say the writing acts and the purposes, the poetic thinking, the impact on teaching. I just need to articulate what actually is happening, and I could use your help with that. Now, this is Allison's case, and I think from what I heard, there's going to be some overlap with yours, which is how it should be, because there are similarities, but there should be also some distinct differences. And I would say for sure, I think I heard things from Kate's and Sean's and Barb's that were very different from what Allison was experiencing. So that's kind of the point of it.